Welcome to this episode of Forgiving the Girl Inside, a Matter of the Heart. I'm your hostess, Lisa Drennan, and this month, this is May of 2022, so if you're watching this in the future, we are doing a series called Sharing the Secret, where beautiful, courageous women are sharing their grieving and healing journeys from a loss of a child, whether it be post-abortion, miscarriage, or through death or an accident. And these stories are just so beautiful. And we're doing this in the month of May because in the United States, May is Mother's Day. We celebrate our moms. And a lot of moms don't take time out for themselves. They don't take time out to grieve, to heal, and just to spend time within themselves. And these beautiful ladies have realized after decades that the key to them being able to pour into others was to heal and to grieve their own loss so that they can pour more into others. Today, we have the beautiful Sherrie Dunlevy. She is the founder of Grieving Academy, Graduating Grief. Sorry, I messed that up a little bit. She went through a loss when she was in the public eye, and she's going to be sharing her story with us. So she also has her own podcast called Graduating Grief. And the title of this episode is Graduating Grief, Loving Your Life After Loss. So be sure, if this resonates with you, please reach out. If you know somebody who needs to hear this, please share it with them. Thank you so much, Sherrie, for being here today and just being willing to share your story. So what was it like? You were in the spotlight, you'd gone through this awesome pregnancy. Everyone knew about it. Tell us about that part of it.
Right. Well, I was a television news anchor for many years, and I stayed at the same station where I started right out of college. And so the audience saw me meet my husband, and they had cameras at my wedding. And when my first son was born, there were cameras in the hospital. So when my family was expanding, of course, everybody was excited about it. And then I ended up having a very high risk pregnancy and delivery, and had to leave the air for a couple of months. And because of the complications, my son Brandon was born, and he lived for 29 days, and then he died. And so, the audience that celebrated with me also grieved right along with me. But the thing is that if you missed the news that day, you might not have known. And so I was finding it very difficult after I lost my son, because I would be out when I was finally healed enough to go out in public, maybe be at the mall or whatnot. Invariably, someone would come up and ask me how my baby was. And I knew that I had to be, and the funny thing is I kept thinking, I'm going to ruin your day now. I'm going to ruin your day, because I'm going to tell you that my son died. And then you're going to beat yourself up all day saying, why did I say that to her? And so I would always cushion the blow for these people. I felt myself comforting them once they found out. It was very bizarre, but it was living in the public eye simply just became too much for me. Because of the nature of the business, it was always bad news. And so I was able to compartmentalize that for so many years. The day's news, you know how horrific that is, right? And so I could compartmentalize that and leave that at work and come home and be mom. But this time, everything was an upheaval. When I came home, I was grieving mom. I was sad mom. And when I went to work, there was the sadness and, tragedy of the world. And it just didn't work anymore. And I went into therapy, of course, thinking it was for grief, which I can get into that a little bit later. But really what I needed was permission that it was okay for me to leave that job. And it was very hard for me to do, because it was all I ever wanted. And it was something that I had worked so hard for. And it was, a coveted position. Like, who just walks away from, anchoring the news, nightly news. And I just knew what I needed for me and what I needed for my family. And so after a year, I stepped away from that career.
Yeah, so honoring your heart-centered agreement by listening to yourself and understanding that that career wasn't for you any longer. But when you'd lost your child, how did he pass away?
He had something that was called a diaphragmatic hernia, and it was a birth defect that's like genetic, but in this case, it was not. So it was
Wow.
just a fluke. And there aren't a lot of survivors of this. At least there weren't 23 years ago.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's really sad. And then instead of grieving it, you try to cushion the blow for other people. What made you react that way? For me, I would have been bawling my eyes out and maybe calling them some choice names for not realizing what had happened. I mean, they obviously wouldn't know, especially, I mean, your body was still healing. It was so new. I mean, 30 days, 29 days after birth, you're still recovering from the delivery and all of that and getting used to
Right.
your changes in your
This
own
was
home.
probably, yeah, a few months down the road, but I don't know. Maybe it was a way of deflecting my pain so that I didn't have to face it. You know what I mean? Like, if I concentrated on how they were going to feel, then I didn't have to really pay attention to how I was feeling. And that might be it. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just such a great loss. I mean, and there's so little, and I never understand that myself, like why little ones have to pass away. Um,
I don't either, but a woman sent a card to me, and it really changed everything for me. And in this card, after he died, and she was just a neighbor of my in-laws. I mean, it wasn't like she was a close friend to my husband and I. She was a close friend to my in-laws, but she said something to the fact that how blessed you were to be chosen to be Brandon's mom. Um, and even though he only lived for such a short time, he brought so many people to their knees to prayer on his behalf that maybe, his job was completed. And I thought, wow, if he could do that in 29 days, what am I doing with my life and how I'm living my life? If he could impact that many people without ever leaving the hospital, without really, there were no TV cameras in the delivery room that day, but it was out of the question. Um,
right.
and and yet he was impacting lives, and he was making his life known, and it was affecting people in a positive way. That they were reaching out with loving kindness, that they were praying, that they were doing something to lift us up. And I thought, he did that for just being. And so that's like one of my taglines is every life can make an impact. How can I make yours, or how am I making mine? So that was very powerful for me. And it got me to thinking, how do I want to live the rest of my life? Do I want to be the poor newswoman who could never recover from the loss of her son? Or could I be the person that said, yes, this happened to me, but this is what I've taken from it. And this is how I'm living now. And this is how I'm carrying my son with me throughout the rest of my life. So, that's where Graduating Grief is. That's where my book, How Can I Help, come. My son is now my partner. We're
Mhm.
co-creators of all of this. And so here we are 23 years later, and his life is still making an impact. And now I'm thinking about how my life will impact the world, instead of just thinking about what kind of career I want, how many children I want to have, what kind of house I want to live in, what kind of car I want to drive, how many promotions I want to try to get to. I live my life in a different way. And so I think that's very profound. And that one simple note in that card helped me shift from how I could have been to how I chose to be.
Mm. And that's exactly what it is. It's a choice.
It
And
is.
when you had that revelation, it was beautiful, and it helped you leave this beautiful legacy, including him, and helping you remember him and celebrate his short life. And that's beautiful. And now you're reaching out and helping others. So that's a beautiful journey. So was it that one card that gave you that shift, and that's what brought you on the grieving journey? The healing?
Well, honestly, I'd like to say, yeah, I took care of my grief right away.
Mhm.
But I here's what I did. I found that I did all the traditional things that people do usually, but I didn't realize that there were things that actually worked. So I went to a support group. The support group was wonderful, and they helped us really through that first year. But the problem with the support group is that there was no end to it. So it was just a perpetuation of telling your story each week and becoming attached to that story. So, and then new people coming in and them telling their story. And while it's great to know there are other people like you that exist, there needs to be a point where you move beyond that. So I was telling my husband, I need to leave. And he said, why? I said, because when I walked in tonight, I was feeling pretty good. And now that I'm leaving, I'm all worked up again and I'm all sad again. And I knew that wasn't how it should have been working, right? I should have been starting to feel better when I leave that group. So I was ready to graduate, but I still needed help dealing with my fear and my anxiety and my guilt that a lot of moms feel. My child is dead. How can I go on and smile? How can I go have fun? How can I, enjoy life when my son is dead? He didn't get a chance for that. How dare I do that? Right? Like, these are the mind games that you play with yourself. And so, I needed to graduate, which many years later is why graduating grief came. But then I realized that through counseling, not a lot of counselors have grief training. Like, I was so shocked at this. They might have a semester with something where grief is a part of the class, but they don't have a lot of grief training. And religion, like when you go to your clergy, it's all about the faith aspect, not the mom who wants, like, I'm glad that my son is in the arms of Jesus, but right now I want him in my arms. So how are you helping the human mom, right? And
Yeah.
so while all of those things helped, it all played into the myth that this is as good as it gets. You're never going to get better. You're never going to feel better, or that time's going to make it better, right? And so it wasn't until all these years later, when my son, who was 3 at the time when Brandon died, was getting ready to graduate high school, that it hit me. I'm losing my son. I'm losing my other son in a whole new way. He's leaving my house now. And the grief that I had been putting on the back burner, thinking that I had a handle on it, just all came to the forefront. That's when I found out about a grief coach and hired one and got my life back. And from that point on, that's when I wrote my book, How Can I Help? That's when, I started talking and inspiring people and encouraging them to reach out and help people that are going through this pain and this grief, because we all can do so much better than what we are. And so it was just like this snowball effect, that once I finally dug it up and brought it out and took care and stared it down and did the work, my life, I went from living in shades of gray to living in color. And that's, I don't want, it took me 13 years to do that. And I don't want it to take one day longer than it needs anybody else to take. So, yeah.
And that's the reason why you started coaching yourself. And you're
Right.
right. A lot of people don't recognize grieving. I know when I was in my career job, when my youngest was in 7th grade, he played lacrosse. And at the end of the lacrosse game, we were watching some of the, other kids play, and the ball hit the kid in the chest, and he, went on the ground. It hit him right in the heart, stopped his heart. And, they rushed him to the hospital. He ended up passing away 2 days later. And I thought, oh my goodness, he was my son's age. That could have been my son. And, that poor mom. And I was telling my boss about it. He's like, yeah, well, we all die. Okay. But like, there's a whole family that's grieving this. Like, they can't just shove it off. Like, oh yeah, we all die. Yeah, I know we're all going to die, but we still need to process the grieving. And I was raised to believe that, when your time on earth is at the dash, right? You got your date of birth and your date of death, and your dash, but you can't control either of those. You can only control the dash. What you do in the dash is really important. So when somebody passes away, you grieve them, you're going to miss them, but you don't like dwell on it. You don't say, oh, poor me. You say, oh, I'm going to miss them. And then you process it. So we've always had a healthy grieving thing, except for me. Like, now I had 2 abortions, which is a loss. And I always felt that it was my choice. And I was explained when I had them when I was 16 back in the 80s that it was just a blob of tissue. So I was like removing a tumor. So with that perception, you don't really experience that loss because you're like, well, no, but my body knew, my body kept the score, and it made a huge impact because I had this connection with those souls. And I didn't realize that. And after I started my healing journey of going through counseling and all of that, I refused to tell anybody. I swore I would never tell. And it wasn't until 2018 when I actually began a healing journey class that I realized, going through the layers, that, wait a minute, I never talked about that incident, and it made a huge impact in my life. And when I started peeling back those layers, I was shocked at how much pain and grief I was holding on to, and how I had felt that I wasn't good enough, and I wasn't. And we all think that we shouldn't grieve because it's not acceptable. It's, you get over it. They live their life, or, everything happens for a reason, all these different, things that people say to us. And then we let that be our triggers, and we let that determine our next steps. So to be able to say, you know what, no, I'm going to do this differently. I'm going to have this new perspective. I'm going to take this circumstance, this event, this thing that I went through, and turn it around and help others and get that shortcut. So you said 13 years from the event until you started. Mine was 3 decades. Mine was over 3 decades. It was 33 years before I even realized that that's what was preventing me. And you had said that you wanted to step away from your job, and then that was the thing that you needed to do. And a lot of times we think we need to like remove things to move on, when really it's this one event, this loss that we suffered, that we didn't process, that we kept burying. Especially as moms, we don't give ourselves time,
right,
to move forward. And then we don't understand why that person at the grocery store set us off, or we saw a child that would have been around the same age and triggered us, and we have no idea it triggered us, but our memory, our subconscious remembers. When you went through your grieving process, what was the one modality that impacted you the most?
What do you mean by that?
So you went to a grieving coach. I mean, what did she do? You said the counseling and the grieving.
It was processing the deep emotion. It was like doing hard, gut-wrenching homework. I went through something called the grief recovery method, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it starts off, and I did it with a private coach, but I offer it in group settings. I just wrapped one up, but you tell your story, then you identify your triggers, and then you go through the timeline of all the different things that you have grieved throughout your life, because you don't grieve just death. Like I said, I was grieving my son graduating from high school and leaving home to go to college. You can grieve moving, you can grieve if you are divorced, we've all been grieving these past 2 years during this pandemic for the way we've been forced to change the way we live our lives, the lives that we once lived. We were grieving that, not to mention the people, the lost jobs, so much grief right now. And I think that if you don't process that grief, it comes out in other ways. It comes out in anger and violence. And look at what's going on, right? It's all of these people that have no idea, first of all, that what they're feeling is grief. And secondly, no clue as how to deal with it. And anger is a stronger emotion. Grief sometimes and sadness makes people feel weaker, more vulnerable. And we can't show that side to people.
Exactly.
And so it's getting in touch with that and being vulnerable with those feelings. That's what it is. And that's what I had to do then. And that's what I lead people to do. But at the same time, you take care of all the unfinished business of the stuff from grief. And then what we do is we release it and we start the process of reorganizing our life, how we want to move forward now. Not that we're not stuck in the why anymore. It's the what now. How do I want to live my life? Who gets a seat at my table? Who doesn't deserve a seat there anymore? Who do I maybe have to let go? Who do I want to call in? What do I want to call in? How do I want to live my life now that my life has changed, and now something in my life that has changed me? I get to call the shots now.
Yeah, and that's beautiful. And at the same time, you're still processing that grief when it does sneak up. You're equipped to do so because you've been working at it every single day. It's not one and done. It's a daily practice of caring for yourself and working through it and making that choice to say, okay, yep, I'm feeling this way. That's okay. Let me process that and let me make that choice to do something good and to reap that benefit of that emotion. So that's beautiful.
Yeah. And I would say today, like as we're recording this is the day that my son transitioned 23 years ago on this day. And there have been times that, it still hurts this mother's heart, right? I go through the trauma of that day. There's just little memories that shoot into my brain. So graduating grief or even healing your grief does not mean you're never going to have days where you don't tear up, or you want to pull the covers over your head. It just means that you now have tools in your toolbox to help you through it, and to know that I'm not okay right now, but I know I will be. And that's the difference between what I know now versus what I didn't know then. I literally thought, I mean, you've seen, you can go all over Facebook and Instagram and all of these memes. Anytime anyone's who lost a child, it's this, you'll be a mess the rest of your life. Well, you don't have to be. You don't have to be if you don't. And that never made sense to me, like, I don't know. That's one of the things this taught me. My son's life and death was on this earth was 29 days, not a day more. That's what it was. And for me to spend time every birthday wondering what he would be like at this age and at this age and at this age is torturing myself. And I do not do that. That's not kind and loving. My son was only supposed to be on this earth for 29 days. And I'm just glad I had those 29 days with him.
That's a beautiful line. I'll date today. It's Wednesday, April 27th, 2022. So those listening in the future, this is going to air on May 11th of 2022. But just to know that Sherri was so willing to come on and share her story on this beautiful Memorial Day of her son's passing. And we had spoken earlier before we recorded And the reason why she has this beautiful, she is the founder of this beautiful organization and wrote her book, is because of him. So she's able to impact lives and help other women who have suffered loss. And I know there's so many of you out there. I'm thinking of one client in particular, who hasn't processed fully that loss. And you're not alone. There's support for you. And if you resonate with Sherri and her story, get her book, connect with her, see if her program's a good fit for you, because you're not alone. And 13 years, 3 decades, that's a long time to stay stuck in thinking, living in the past and thinking that there's no hope, that you're by yourself, that there's nobody out there that feels that way, because there is. And as Sherri had explained, counseling and therapy is great, but when you have to relive it over and over again and you're not progressing, you're not graduating, that's where we get stuck and that's where we get frustrated. So learning how to deal with those triggers and processing it and learning to take it and leave a legacy, letting that dash be the most important thing that you work on. So thank you so much, Sherri, for sharing it. What's the best way to get a hold of you?
You can go to graduatinggrief.com. I have a free quiz there, graduatinggrief.com/quiz, and you can see where you are on your journey. And Lisa, I just want to thank you for taking the opportunity to talk about these things that a lot of people try to forget, right? We try to forget these things that are that can touch every aspect of our lives. And it's important. This is why we don't talk about these things. And this is why it becomes so uncomfortable for everyone. The more we start talking and finding each other and realizing that there is hope and healing. And if it happened for you, if it happened for me, then maybe it can happen for other women. We need to shout this from the mountaintop. So thank you for your dedication to this, because it's so important for other women to know.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing your time with us today and sharing your story. I really appreciate you, and I'm just very grateful that this was a great day for it all to come together. So again, if you are listening, you want to connect with Sherri, the link to connect with her is in the description. Please share this with whoever you know needs to hear it. Come forward, get the help. You are not alone. You don't need to be stuck. You are your best investment. You are your best asset. Take care of you. And the best way, the quickest way, you can, listen to YouTube, listen to Google or Google stuff and try to find things to grieve. But when you connect with a mentor, that's when the healing really begins, because you have that accountability, you have that support. So don't delay. Remember, mindset is the crux of all that we do. It's a matter of the heart.